Hopefully I can get through it before Richard gets home and the dogs start barking. Here we go. The Pope seemed to identify himself too much with the dictators, wrote M. Francisco Charles Rowe, French ambassador to the Vatican. But it could be otherwise when the Holy See itself had raised these men to power. Mussolini, the prototype, was the inaugurator of that series of providential men. These sword bearers who would prepare the revenge for 1918. From Italy, where it prospered so well under the care of the Jesuit father Tacchi Venturi and his acolytes, fascism was soon to be exported to Germany. Quote, Hitler receives his impetus from Mussolini. The idea of the Nazi is the same as in Italy. Since Mussolini is at the head, all the sympathies are for Berlin. In 1929, his fascism merges with National Socialism. He becomes friends with Hitler, to whom he supplies arms and money, unquote. At that time, Monsignor Pacelli, future Pius XII, and then the Cura's best diplomat, is nuncio in Munich, capital of Catholic Bavaria. There, the star of the future German dictator starts to rise. He is also a Catholic, like his most important associates. Of that country, cradle of Nazism, M. Maurice Laporte tells us, quote, its two enemies are called Protestantism and democracy, unquote. Perugia's anxiety is therefore understandable. Quote, it is easy to guess what kind of special care the Vatican gives Bavaria, where Hitler's National Socialism recruits its strongest contingents, unquote. To take from heretic Perugia the control of the German secular arm and transfer it to the Catholic Bavaria, what a dream. Monsignor Pacelli puts all in his power to realize it, acting in concert with the chief of the Company of Jesus. Quote, after the other war, 1914 to 1918, the Jesuits General Hawk von Lodowski had conceived a vast plan. The creation, with or without Emperor Habsburg, of a federation of the Catholic nations in Central and Eastern Europe, Austria, Slovakia, Bohemia, Poland, Hungary, Croatia, and of course, Bavaria. Quote, this new Central Empire had to fight on two fronts. On the eastern side against the Soviet Union, on the western side against Perugia, Protestant Great Britain, and the Republican, rebellious France. At that time, Monsignor Pacelli, future Pius XII, was nuncio in Munich, then in Berlin, and an intimate friend of Cardinal Faulhaber, von Lodowski's main collaborator. The Lodowski plan was the dream of Pius XII's youth. But was it only a dream of youth? The Mittel Europa Hitler tried to organize was very similar to that plan, apart from the presence in that bloc of Lutheran Perugia, a not very dangerous minority, and the recognized zones of influence which maybe temporarily belonged to Italy. In fact, it was the Lodowski plan adapted to the needs of the time, which the Fuhrer was trying to realize under the patronage of the Holy See, with the help of Franz von Papen, secret chamberlain of the Pope, and the nuncio to Munich, then Berlin, Monsignor Pacelli. M. Francisco Charles Roux writes, quote, during the contemporary epoch, world politics never felt the Catholic intervention more than during the ministry of Monsignor Pacelli, unquote. We also read from M. Joseph Ravon, quote, now Catholic Bavaria is going to welcome and protect all those who sow trouble, all those confederates and assassins of de la Saint Vehemi, unquote. From amongst these agitators, the choice of Germany's regenerators will fall upon Hitler, who is destined to triumph over the democratic mistakes under the Holy Father's standard. Of course, he is a Catholic, like his principal collaborators. quote, the Nazi regime is like a return to the government of southern Germany. The names and origins of its chief demonstrated. Hitler is specifically Austrian. Göring is Bavarian. Goebbels is Rhenish, and so on, unquote. In 1924, the Holy See signs a concordat with Bavaria. In 1927, we read in Cologne's Gazette, Pius XI is certainly the most German pope who ever sat on the throne of St. Peter, unquote. His successor, Pius XII, will rob him of this palm, but for the time being, he pursues his diplomatic career, rather his political career, in this Germany for which, as he later told Ribbentrop, he would always have a special affection. Promoted nuncio in Berlin, he works with Franz von Papen as destroying the Weimar Republic. On the 20th of July, 1932, a state of siege is proclaimed in Berlin, and the ministers expelled manu militari. It is the first step towards Hitlerian dictatorship. New elections are prepared, which will establish the success of the Nazi. Quote, with Hitler's approval, Göring and Strasser got in contact with Monsignor Koss, part chief of the Catholic Center, unquote. Cardinal Bertram, Archbishop of Breslau and Primate of Germany, declared, quote, we, Christians and Catholics, do not recognize any religion or race, unquote. With many other bishops, he tried to warn the faithful against, quote, the papal ideal of the Nazi, unquote. Not papal, the pagan idea of the Nazi, unquote. Obviously, this prelate had not understood papal politics, but he was soon going to be taught. Quote, the Mercure de France gave an excellent study in 1934. In the beginning of 1932, German Catholics did not consider they had lost the cause, but in the spring, their chiefs seemed somewhat irresolute. They had been told that the Pope was personally in favor of Hitler, unquote. Quote, that Pius XI was sympathetic to Hitler should not surprise us. For him, Europe could settle down again only through Germany's hegemony. The Vatican had thought of changing the center of gravity of the Reich through the Anschluss for a long time, and the Company of Jesus was openly working towards that aim, Lewandowski's plan, especially in Austria. We know how Pius XI depended on Austria to make what he called his politics triumph. What had to be prevented was the hegemony of Protestant Prussia, and as the Reich was the one to dominate Europe, a Reich had to be rebuilt where the Catholics would be masters. Quote, in March 1933, the German bishops meeting at Fulda, Fulda, took advantage of the speech Hitler gave at Potsdam to declare, we must admit that the highest representative of the government of the Reich, who is at the same time the head of the National Socialist movement, has made public and solemn declarations by which the inviolability of the Catholic doctrine, the work and unchangeable rights of the Church are recognized. Von Papen leaves for Rome. This man, whose past is so wicked, becomes a pious pilgrim with the mission to conclude a concordat for the whole of Germany with the Pope. He too will have to emulate Mussolini's overtures towards the Vatican. In fact, the same happens in both countries. In Italy, the Catholic party of Don Sturzo ensures Mussolini's ascension to power. In Germany, the Zentrum of Monsignor Koss does the same for Hitler, and on both occasions, a concordant seals the pact. M. Joseph Rovin admits this as follows, quote, thanks to von Papen, deputy at the Zentrum since 1920 and owner of the party's official publication, Germania, Hitler came to power on the 30th of January, 1933. German political Catholicism, instead of becoming Christian Democrat, was eventually made to confer full powers on Hitler on the 26th of March, 1933. To vote in favor of full powers, a 2/3 majority was necessary, and the votes of the Zentrum were indispensable to obtain it. The same author adds, in the correspondence and declarations of ecclesiastical dignitaries, we will always find under the Nazi regime the fervent approval of the bishops, unquote. This fervor is easily explained when we read the following from von Papen, quote, the general terms of the concordat were more favorable than all other similar agreements signed by the Vatican. And the Chancellor, Hitler, asked me to assure the Papal Secretary of State, Cardinal Pacelli, that he would immediately muzzle the anti-clerical clan, unquote. This was not an empty promise. Already during that year, 1933, apart from the massacre of Jews and assassinations perpetrated by the Nazis, there were 45 concentration camps in Germany with 40,000 prisoners of various political opinions, but mostly liberals. Franz von Papen, the Pope's secret chamberlain, defined perfectly the deep meaning of the pact between the Vatican and Hitler by this phrase worth engraving, quote, Nazism is a Christian reaction against the spirit of 1789, unquote. In 1937, Pius XI, under the pressure of the world opinion, condemned the racial theories as incompatible with Catholic doctrine and principles in what his apologists amusingly call the terrible encyclical letter. Nazi racism is condemned, but not Hitler, its promoter. Distinguished Guillot, and the Vatican takes care not to denounce the advantageous coordinate concluded 4 years earlier with the Nazi Reich. While the Cross of Christ and the swastika were cooperating in Germany, Benito Mussolini set forth on the easy conquest of Ethiopia with the Holy Father's blessing. Quote, the sovereign pontiff had not condemned Mussolini's politics and had left the Italian clergy fully free to cooperate with the fascist government. The ecclesiastics, from the priests of humble parishes to the cardinals, spoke in favor of the war. One of the most striking examples came from the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, Alfredo Ildefonso Schuster, Jesuit, who went as far as calling this campaign a Catholic crusade. Italy, clarified Pius XI, thinks this war is justified because of a pressing need for expansion. Quote, 10 days later, when speaking to an audience of ex-servicemen, Pius XI expressed the wish that the legitimate claims of a great and noble nation from which he reminded them he himself descended would be satisfied, unquote. The fascist aggression against Albina on Good Friday in 1939 enjoyed the same understanding as we are told by M. Camille Sinfara. Quote, the Italian occupation of Albania was very advantageous for the church. Out of a population of 1 million Albanian people, which became Italian subjects, 68% were Muslims, 20% Greek Orthodox, and only 12% Catholics. From the political point of view, the annexation of the country by a Catholic power was bound to improve the position of the church and please the Vatican, unquote. In Spain, the establishment of the Republic had not ceased to be resented by the Roman Cura as a personal offense. Quote, I never dared mention the Spanish question to Pius XI, unquote, wrote M. Francisco Charles Rowe. He probably would have reminded me that the church's interest in that great and historical land of Spain were a matter for the papacy only, unquote. So this protected hunting ground was soon provided with a dictator similar to those who had already successful in Italy and Germany. The adventure of General Franco only started in mid-July 1936, but on the 21st of March 1934, the Pact of Rome had been sealed between Mussolini and the chiefs of Spain reactionary parties, one of whom was M. Goashira, chief of the Renovación Española. By this pact, the Italian Fascist Party undertook to supply with rebels money, war material, arms, and ammunition. We know that they even did more than what they had promised, and that Mussolini and Hitler kept on refueling the Spanish rebellion with material, aviation, and volunteers. As for the Vatican, oblivious of its own principle that the faithful must respect the established government, it oppressed Spain with its threats. Quote, the Pope excommunicated the heads of the Spanish Republic and declared spiritual war between the Holy See and Madrid. Then he produced the encyclical letter. This is Delatissimi Nobis. The Archbishop Goma, new primate of Spain, proclaimed the Civil War. I'm going to have to end that there until here a little bit because the dogs want out and Richard just got home, so they'll be barking. So I will finish this later. Okay? Keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God, and embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Till next time. Bye-bye.